Hello everyone, welcome to Mathfinder, the home for every math nerd's Pathfinder organization needs. If you're new here, welcome, and we're so glad to have you. If you've been here before, welcome back, and thank you for your continued support. Speaking of support, a few days back, I finally enabled channel memberships for this channel. It's a small monthly fee. You will be able to support me and get a few perks to show it off. You will get channel badges, and in the future, emojis, and also early access to some of my videos. Later, I will be adding higher tiers of channel membership, but for now, the lowest tier is all that's available. If you can, please join it. And if you can't, then please continue to like, comment, and subscribe, because those are all great ways of supporting the channel as well. So my next series of videos I was planning on doing was something focusing on how to do spell selection, beyond just looking at underrated spells and why they're underrated, like I've been doing. Something that lets you build a caster with a holistic sense of how you're going to pick out certain spells, what your tactics will look like, etc. And then this morning, a friend of mine messaged me building a primal spellcaster for the first time, and he was just overwhelmed. He said there's way too many spells in this game. How am I even supposed to begin looking at all of them? And he did, because he is obsessive about character building and look through all of them anyways, but he's right. It's really hard to look through all of these spells, and I think that is one of the big reasons for a lot of the narratives that surround spellcasters being weak, or meta spells being the only way to play a spellcaster, because when you come onto this list, and I don't know, you select Primal, there's 529 Primal spells, there are 693 Arcane spells, there are 1,445 spells in total? What? It just gets overwhelming, and how do you begin to make sense of that, right? So I figured that before going into spell selection, I will first do a little video on how you can use Archives of Nethys to even narrow down the list to the meaningful spells you want to look at, because I don't want you to just end up looking at my videos and taking my word for it that these are all the good spells. I want you to have the ability to look at it yourself. So let's get started on that. So to start with, the very first thing you want to do to reduce the number of spells you're looking at is, see how this is 1,445 spells? This is because it includes every single spell in the game, including focus spells. If you were only looking at spells that belong to one of the traditions, so in this case it said include or, and just selected all 4 traditions. So each of these spells will come from at least one tradition. That's just 1,001 results. There are 444 focus spells, focus cantrips, etc. that are showing up on this list and making the spells look a lot more overwhelming. If you narrowed it down to just one tradition, so let's say you're building a wizard, so you pick Arcane, now you have basically half the number of spells you're going to look at. 693 instead of the 1,445 we started with. Let's try to narrow it a little further down. Go to level and perhaps restrict it to rank 1 to 3 spells, right? Let's say you're building a level 1 wizard. You don't need to know all the spells you're going to pick all the way to rank 10. You only really need to think of what you're going to pick right now, and maybe what you'll pick until rank 3, because you have to plan what scrolls you'll buy, how many things you'll learn. A lot of spontaneous casters have to plan their retrains. And look, we again have the number of spells we look at. 380 is still a lot. So what can we do to narrow this down further? Let's scroll through some of these spells. Look at Air Bubble. All it does is helps your friend breathe as a reaction. Look at Alarm. All it does is set an alarm. Look at Ant Haul. All it's doing is helping you carry more weight. These are all useful out-of-combat spells, but when you're at level 1 and picking out your rank 1 to 3 spells, you're probably going to primarily focus on picking combat spells. You want to narrow it down to using your spell slots for that big boom they're designed for. This can be offensive spells, like ones that directly target an enemy, or defensive spells, or buff spells, but they're not going to be something like Ant Haul. You can start narrowing it down by thinking of what roles your spellcaster is expected to fill in a party. Are you trying to be offensively oriented? Are you trying to be a buffer? And then you can use these filters to filter out some of these roles. For example, if you use some of these area types, you can filter out spells that will help you be an area blaster and a crowd controller, right? Another option is you can filter spells by the defense they target. Any good offensively built spellcaster will pick at least 2 saves and AC as the defenses they target. Arcane is the one that's privileged enough to be able to target all 4 defenses at all levels with all variety of spells. but most spell lists can do at least 2 of the saves and AC and struggle with the third one. For example, if you're occult, you only have a couple good spells that target reflex. Since we're an arcane, let's just go one by one. You go will. You will perhaps pick fear at level 1. That targets will. You don't have any good cantrip to look at. Then forget will and look at reflex. You'll pick electric arc, and you have only 9 or so spells to look at. You can go through, you may end up picking Thunderstrike, or Breathe Fire, or Chilling Spray. Few good options here. Then forget reflex and look at fortitude. You might pick Frostbite or Void Warp from the cantrips. And then for the spells, you might pick Dehydrate, Enfeeble, or Gravitational Pull, or Forge. These are all good options. Now the thing is, each time you're doing this, look how small the list gets. You're only looking at about 13 spells at rank 1 if you look at will. You're only looking at 9 spells at rank 1 if you're looking at reflex. You're only looking at 3 spells at rank 1 if you're looking at AC. I think it's supposed to be a bit more. There's a few spells missing here, unfortunately. But again, like, there's no big loss to filtering this way if you're feeling overwhelmed. Hydraulic Push is a good spell. You won't necessarily miss it over, say, Horizon Thunder Sphere. This is just a differently good spell than Horizon Thunder Sphere. That helps you filter for offenses. How do you filter for buffs? Probably the best way to filter for buffs is removing all the defenses they target. So if you click it twice, you can filter to exclude anything that targets AC, Fortitude, Reflex, or Will. And now there's a lot of spells, because this is including a lot of utility spells too, but you have at least managed to narrow it down by removing all the offensive spells. So now you'll scroll through, and yes, Air Bubble, not relevant, but it is at least easier to be like, oh yeah, here's Conductive Weapon, that's a buff. Here's Fleet Step, that's a buff. And perhaps to narrow it down further, you can take this duration and make it 60 seconds. That will do a pretty good job of narrowing it down to buffs, because buffs are usually designed to not last that long. Like, you can see buffs and control spells that don't target any defenses are all showing up here now. So that's how I like to filter out the spells while I'm looking at them. And then within that, you don't have to stress out too much about spell selection. Once you've narrowed it down to, say, just all offensive spells that target reflex, you only have to look at a handful of them to figure out what you shouldn't pick and what you should pick. Likewise, once you've filtered it down to all these buffs, you can pretty easily figure out what is worth picking and just ignore the other 100 or so spells that are at this rank. Just look at these 24 spells, and out of that, there's probably 10 or so buffs. And then finally, one more trick of spell selection is once you get to higher levels, so let's say now this wizard has gotten to level 7, you want to start getting the efficiency out of your lower rank spell slots. A really good way to do that is to just look at reactions, remove all those other filters we have put, but just look at the reaction spell, because a lot of reactions, oh, and free action and one action as well, a lot of reactions and one action spells are very good to squeeze in between your turns of effective 2-action spells. So for example, when you're level 7, you can probably just throw out a couple of Interposing Earths or Hidebounds to protect yourself or your allies with. You can probably throw out a Timely Tutor very easily, or even a 1-action Force Barrage from a lower rank spell slot. So that's another area where you can filter to look at what you will fill your lower rank spell slots with while you yourself are a much higher level. So yeah, this was a pretty short video. I hope you found it helpful. I just figured this would be a good mini start to the series of how to start looking at spells without getting overwhelmed by them. Once you're able to look at this a bit more comfortably via Nethys, you will find yourself knowing how to make the spell selections, because there are a few principles to picking spells well that I will go into in my future spell selection videos, and filtering it this way will help you actually see the spells you want to pick. That'll be all for today, folks. If you like this content, please like, comment, and subscribe, and join the channel if that is an option for you. Until next time.